Hello, Twitch users. So, this is our new schedule starting just this week. A tonight's show we're calling The Journey. Where will your adventures take you? So, this Monday night show, we're going to focus on world building and exploration. So, we're going to cover a lot. Tonight's video is just going to be more of an introduction. But over the course of time, I hope to really cover a lot of things like map making and talking about the peoples that populate our fantasy worlds, cultures, foods, travel, traversing the different locations that we're building into our worlds. But ultimately, just talking about the worlds that we create as a part of the Dungeons and Dragons realms, as well as other realms as well. So if you have questions, pop them in the chat. I'm going to get underway here shortly and just really look and see what people think of the show. Like I said, this is the beginning of our new schedule where each week we're going to be covering different subjects. Sometimes we'll have different camera angles. We've got a regular guest who's going to join us on, I believe it's Tuesdays and Fridays. So that is also going to be good. And yeah, I thought for today, let's go ahead and let me just tell you a little bit about my game world, which is called Earth. And my game world really started in 1991. And maybe not even 1991, maybe 1989 is when I first started creating my own game world. And a lot of that came from a blend of D&D editions. So we had played basic and expert into advanced, into second. And one of the things that really captured my mind was in between adventures, if I was lucky enough to have an adventure that lived through a whole adventure, whether it be Keep on the Borderlands, Palace of the Silver Princess, Shrine of the Kuo-toa, the unexplored maps of Greyhawk really drove my desire to kind of build up kingdoms and think about how those different kingdoms upon forming would interact with other kingdoms. And I knew that what I wanted to do would not have an immediate impact negatively on the materials that were being put out at the time. The maps weren't going to be updated. Other people were not going to be playing in my game world. And it did not have a negative impact on me. I thought it was absolutely cool to be able to design and make my own based off those materials. So that's really what I did. I started drawing maps and creating this world where I envisioned these adventures that I had experienced could also be played and be very different from when we had played and gone through them beforehand. So it was really a way for me to branch out on my own, creating my own game world based on what I'd learned, what I'd been inspired with. And that's really how I started. I started with a small area, just like a region size, I guess you would say, part of a continent, and just kept expanding it from there for quite some time. And at some point, I realized that the continents and realms that I was building were much bigger than the world that I had been describing and initially planned out. So I quickly had to make a couple of adjustments and changed some of the kingdom maps and region and continent maps that I had drawn and started to populate and really put information in. I changed several of those to be connected and then started brand new, fresh with a world map. And at the time, I really went through and decided this is how my world is going to be. However, there are areas where it could vary. And I've stuck with that since then. And so that, I guess, really did start in 91, even though I started some of it as early as 89. When I really decided to make my own world, that was probably 1990, 1991. And I took a lot of inspiration and blended it into my game world. Not only real world, historical cultures and peoples and lands that I found interesting and fascinating and did a lot of studying with, but also from shows and movies. I took a lot of things that I really enjoyed watching and I guess living with, growing up with. I took a lot of that and integrated it into my game. So my feeling is that my game world is a thieving from every source you can imagine. And I really like being able to bring out some of those aspects that people, kind of recognize. And I don't mind that they experience some of those things that meant so much to me. So an example is for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons at the time, there were, there was a cartoon going on. I guess it had been canceled by then, but I still watched reruns of it, and the toy line was still pretty big. And so some of the figures from those lines have appearances in my game world. So Venger is a villain. You can run into Garn Greyrune, who is an illusionist working with one of the magic schools of one of the big capitals. A lot of the different areas, like some of the frontier areas, are pulled right off of Dragon Slayer. So I've integrated a lot of pop culture, I think, also into my game world. And now I'm lucky enough to be able to share it with others and really have other people see some of the things that have brought me inspiration and enjoy them, hopefully, as much as I have as I was going through them. With my game world, like I said, I initially started small and then went large and then went back in. So going through and looking at how, once I built my world and really defined the continents, the lands, islands, oceans, seas, I started diving in more and more and really fleshing some of those out. Some areas I just left kind of gray and did not touch for a long time, and part of that has helped as well, because then as I'm gaming, I'm able to go through and still be creative. It's not something that has, finished and there's no evolution to it. So the ability to still be creative with a game world that's now, a number of years old, is still refreshing and invigorating. And for me, one of my kind of comical call-outs is every time there is a new edition, there is a world-shaking event that has an impact on the world, so that I can kind of take some time and dive into the new editions and continue to use my game world as though it's new and fresh, so that if people do want to try out new editions, it doesn't hamper our gameplay at all. So it's pretty interesting to do that. Of course, now Dungeons and Dragons is on a 5th edition, so we've had a number of earth-shattering events that have occurred in the game world, and yeah, I really enjoy things like that. Um, it also allows me to use things that are older and uh, things that I've enjoyed. I'm able to recycle them. What used to be a grand, stronghold of previous adventures now is ruins that a new generation of explorers and adventurers get to, kind of delve into and do some dungeon crawls in areas that I'm very familiar with. Kind of what was there beforehand and what the occupants were into, how they lived their lives, what they collected. By reusing some of those aspects, I'm able to really put a lot of details in that I feel my players really benefit from. So for that aspect, I think it's really good and has really allowed me to dive into some of the world lore even deeper. I'm able to bring a lot of that world lore into the games in fun and exciting ways. And yeah, overall, I just think it's a great process to be able to keep that creativity driving forward and making sure that as I'm building my world out, using what I've done before and reskinning it and repurposing it, having that great understanding of it, I'm caught off guard less and less just because I have a good familiarity and awareness of the game world. Um, so that for me is something that I think has been a real blessing. Um, let's see. I know some of the things that I really want to cover on this channel are things like maps, map making, how you can use maps and really drive story from some of your maps, how to integrate story into your maps and make it feel part of the world. I think for me, one of the things that I'd like to do, and especially as this goes onto YouTube and gets out to a broader allotment of viewers as well, is are there things that are going to be most helpful for you that we can cover in this channel and really make it something that's more community focused and able to help the broader community with developing game worlds, especially as we look at things like multiverse, opportunities where we can, whether it's on Roll20 or whatever, share each other's worlds and explore each other's worlds and have impacts on each other's worlds. I know with Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, Forgotten Realms is the primary focus, I guess, focus world, with big focus on the Sword Coast. However, a lot of the materials they've put out now have been in other areas. I think of things like the Odyssey of Theros as a great example. There is a lot of opportunity for exploring each other's worlds and helping each other to come up with new creative ideas and really bring a fantastic world to our players collectively. So exploring the game worlds and really diving in how to make them feel more authentic and real for our player characters to interact with is definitely an important key. If we want to have good buy-in for the games that we're running, we have to be able to put in the amount of work that we hope people will take and run with to build stories on. So for me, it really starts and ends with the game worlds that we're creating, the environment. Because as we set the stage for our players to have their characters interact with, the more tangible it is, the more fleshed out it is, the more confidence we have in how the environment and those in the environment would react back. I think of early campaigns where I had a lot of murder hobos and thinking about how would the populations react to this band of murder hobos who are going through the countryside kind of willy-nilly, just taking what they want. How would that affect not just the immediate area they're in, but on the grand scheme of things? What would the kingdoms do? And by having a good understanding of who those kingdoms are, who's running them, and kind of their moral compass, you might say, I'm able to better react to what the players' characters are doing. And of course, you can adjust this if you're running good or evil campaigns, neutral campaigns, whatever the case may be. But having a good understanding of your game world is going to allow you to react to the story that's being woven together with your players via their characters on the backbone of story that you've put in place is a key element to keep the players engaged in your game world, caring about their characters' impacts to your game world, and making sure that they understand that the time and effort we're spending is all designed for their characters to have an impact on the game world. Again, whether it's for good or evil, as we design our bones of our game world and start fleshing it out and having reactions to what the characters are doing in our game world, it's going to start drawing those players in more and more into your gaming world. And again, it won't matter if it's Forgotten Realms or a homebrew creation of your own. Those players are going to have a better understanding of the game and how their characters are going to be interacting with the game world. As we talk about some of the ongoing pieces of world building, I think one of the biggest things we can start to focus on is our starting area. And this also is going to change from game to game, or I should say from campaign start to campaign start, which is kind of challenging because what is a campaign? I know we've covered that in videos in our YouTube channel, but when I think of a campaign, I think of an ongoing series starring the same characters. It's a story arc that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. For me, that's a campaign. If the characters see that storyline through, they've successfully completed a campaign. So if you're just getting into world building, starting to think about your beginning area is going to be a key important factor of it. There's a lot of discussion on what the best way to start a campaign is. You know, do you start in a tavern? Are you prisoners? Whatever the case may be, regardless of where you start your characters and what that initial meeting of the party is, the starting area is where you're going to want to spend a lot of time, because generally your party members are not going to be able to go too far away from that unless it's by design, unless it's by story element. They should kind of be questioning and discovering. That should be your exploration phase, where they're trying to understand what the big picture is and how can they impact that big picture. So your starting area is going to be super important. If you're looking at something more local, of course, that's going to be a city, a town, a village, whatever the small area for them to start gathering information, doing some exploring, getting a game plan, kind of learning what the adventure in front of them is. And that could be from a patron, could be from a job board, could be from a lot of different things. But as they're going through and exploring this initial starting area, you want to have a real good understanding of what that area is. I can't stress enough that this is the most important amount of prep time you want to spend as a GM. Because if you do have a good starting area that you understand, when your players go left, when you think they're going to go right, you're going to be happier, I guess, or more able to deal with the unknown. You're going to be able to improv with confidence. Now, a lot of people can improv, and when the party is expected to go to the temple and start asking about the dead rising from the grave, instead they want to go to the library. And knowing your area is absolutely key, because you know that either there is no library, or this is what the library is like and kind of how it interacts with the general place. And it's quick and easy. You have a good understanding of what your starting area is, and you can quickly improv them going to the library instead of the temple that you thought they would go to, as they maybe are doing research. So starting area is super important. Anybody who's looking at world building specifically, that's absolutely key. Now, definitely a big difference from when you are running a module or pre-printed game, like Icewind Dale, for instance, is a good one. There, the starting locations are already kind of given to you in the form of the manual. You can go through and look at all the different villages, the 10 towns, the mountains, the glaciers, the sea. You get a good understanding of what's there and why, so that rather than going to the 10 towns, if the party decides they want to go directly to the mountains, you've got a good understanding, provided you've done some prep work and moved into reading ahead a bit, as a GM should. You've got a good understanding of what they're going to encounter, what the conditions are going to be like, what they need to be prepared for it, and what outcomes to start imposing if they're not prepared. So understanding the game area like you would a pre-published material is super important. Pardon me. Oh, excuse me. Now, with the homebrew option, when you're creating it, like I said earlier, don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. One of the worst things you can do is reinventing the wheel. The wheel is already there. It's a fantastic invention. You're able to slap it on a car and go. I recommend people do this as often as possible, because it's going to save you a lot of time and effort. Prep work is definitely important, but too much prep work can be a detriment, because there is so much material out there that you can just start pulling from, that, in my opinion, you don't need to. Pick something that's inspired you really well and start there. If it's just an area that you're looking at doing, pick a movie that has a great area that you can draw inspiration from and use that as your starting area. Maybe you like maybe there's a certain book you like that does a great job of describing a city or a town. Maybe it's a show. Maybe you like something like Vikings, where you can use one of the locations of the different chieftains' locations and start weaving that in. Anywhere you can, I recommend for people to start using inspiration as their basis and then build upon that. Because just as if you were to use the area around 10 towns or the Sword Coast as a whole for your starting location, the second you start making any adjustments or changes, that's your multiverse planet. So even if you want to use Sword Coast, Greyhawk, Orth, whatever the case may be, once you prep up to start making it your own, that's when you're really going to want to start taking notes and looking at the things that you're adjusting, changing, and really basing your own world's development on. Once you start taking these notes and really pushing for buy-in from your player characters, that's where they start building onto your world as well, and then you just become the record keeper. If they are those murder hobo type of people, again, how the societies and peoples and maybe kingdoms react to their shenanigans and hijinks is going to have big impacts down the road in a different village, in a different kingdom, maybe even on a different continent. So being aware of the parts and pieces of your game world is going to be super important. There is definitely a big boon, in my opinion, of being a DM and making sure that you are keeping your game world from stagnating out. Again, this goes back to what I said earlier, was reusing a lot of things. I've had to do a lot of moves across country for work, and challenges include always having to find a new group, a new gaming group. And I've certainly been very fortunate in the groups I've been able to play with, the groups and really friends and families that have shared this hobby with me. So for me, I've really been lucky in that aspect, in that I have things that I am able to reuse, and it is new and fresh and exciting each time I have to start a new game group. And I have things that for so many years have been so explored. I've already mapped them out. Worst case scenario, I have to change up a little bit, show for time, wear, age, siege even. And I'm able to reuse things, even down to story elements. So keeping track of that type of information has really benefited me. Organization, I think, is one of the big key pieces any GM can do. As you're going through working on Game World, I really recommend making sure that you have the right tools that are right for you, whether that's digital, making sure that your Google Docs are up to date, you're keeping things in set folders that you can access and review and update and change. If you're old school like me, I've got maybe an eighth of the stuff digital, everything else pen and paper, pencil and paper. And I have binders. Oh, I apologize. I have binders that I keep everything in. And I try to scan and upload onto my Patreon. I just need to be better at it. It's one of the things I'm going to push for this year, is being better at sharing all the content that I've created. With plenty of time now, I think we're going to change up our format a little bit, and we're going to go over a little bit of map making. because I have a map that I need to create. And this goes again into sharing information. So I created it's a list of, or not even a list, it's just a guide for a person on social media, and they asked about magic shops and magic pricing. And so I created a piece on DM's Guild. It's free to download. It is called Markets of Magic. Markets of Magic. So it is not yet complete. And I apologize for the roughness. We're going to minimize this window here. And we're going to adjust the studio slightly. So Markets of Magic, this is what I put together. This is just shopping locations and examples. Now what's online currently on the DM's Guild is just standard fare. It's got tables for different locations that are going to have magic items for sale. This was at the request, like I said, of someone who wanted to know quickly and easily how to have their characters be able to go in and buy magic items. So you can see here, this is not illustrated because I have not had the time to illustrate. So what we're going to do is actually start prepping out and making a map. Excuse me again. So I went through the first place, the first location that I called out in this piece for the requester was I put a magic shop that met all the requirements, I guess you could say, based on the Dungeon Master's Guide. So amount of magic items, pricing of magic items, everything met kind of the standards that were set. We're going to change this around a little bit in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So this is in a larger city, and the patrons of this location are in the business of buying and selling magic items and things like potions. So I mapped it out on graph paper just so I had a decent starting point. And I think what we're going to do is once I get this all illustrated, which we'll probably do live on this broadcast as we go through weekly, a little bit more and more, is I will have this first illustration point. Once it is complete, I will sign it, and we'll just give it away as a prize once we're all done. Now the reason I am not using the graph paper that I initially sketched this on is because when I did the sketch, I did it larger than scale to the graph paper. And I did this just because this is an illustration, which is something you'll have to think about. An illustration versus something you're going to use in-game as, say, a player handout or just a note that you are doing. There should be some variation on those. things like maps for handouts are super important. And you want to make sure that you have got those to the right scale so that your players, who are generally going to be the recipients of those handouts, have good information. Nobody wants their players to have bad information. Then we lose sight that the game is all about the collective storytelling. So what I'm doing here is, because this is a magic shop, just doing an outline. And again, because it's an illustration, I want this to be a little bit more decorative than just an in-game map. Now, of course, we'll have to clean this up for the digital version. But that is okay. So, oh, I apologize. I didn't see that was all the way off for that upper edge. We'll keep it right there. That'll help. So you can see there is a door here. And this we're going to label as loading door. This is the back of the shop. And so this is the front of the shop. Now, by putting my initial sketch back behind, I'm able to see the scale. I know where the squares are. And then I can pop in things like the shelves, cases, pillars, secret door, spiral staircase, and of course staircases we always do the arrow showing the up. This is open to below. Here we have got a statue, and then just some more racks. Now, this magic shop is not just a magic shop. Of course, following the DM's guide, things like magic items should be in high demand and should be viewed at more like the fine art world. So for this magic shop, I got a couple of errors that we'll have to have something under there. We'll have to clean up in Photoshop. Unless you are the participant in entering to win a free item. So map making, one of the biggest things that I've found over time is when you're making maps, they have to absolutely be familiar to you. And I know this one isn't as exciting as, say, an area map or regional map where you're able to put in landscape pieces. You're able to do a lot of different, fun woods and valleys and mountains and hills and caves. So something like a magic shop isn't super interesting and exciting. However, it can be very, I would say, rewarding. So this magic shop, when I designed it, is all about kind of a familiar front for the two NPCs who I've used in the past. And I've described this area a number of times, just an absolute number of times. Now here what I'm going through is, so on this map, basically the scale is 1 square is 2.5 feet. So I can go through and just kind of map out that where the markers are. And I do this just kind of rough, again, just for a little bit of scale. I want the players, when they come in here and see this map, should the GM decide to, kind of present it to them, I want them to be able to understand the scale. So I am going to actually manage this out and put some of these graph areas in. This is also super important if you're doing anything like old temples where you can put in the tiles that are cracked. This shop here is kind of old, so we can decorate it up. The racks we can also decorate up and put on things like bottles. We want to start putting some shadows in. A little box maybe here, and this has got a couple of bands to it. With this shop, they do carry a lot of equipment. So maybe we'll have here, this will be just a big thing of rope, because every adventuring party needs 3 characters to carry 50 feet of rope. And then again, we want to put some shading in here to show some dimension. And you can see I'm doing this in blue and not black. And again, that's because this is an illustration. As I scan this and then do any cleanup in my photo adjuster, the blue actually works better for that than if I were to go black. Because if you go black and you scan it, you're going to have the white actually lose a lot of the brilliance to it. So blue actually works better. I'm going through and highlighting or shading around all of these fixtures because I want to have consistent light and shadows. So the light would be coming kind of from this direction. And we'll make these ones be a little bit bigger because they are taller. And then we'll do the same thing with our statue. We'll have some shadow. This is the base. Now this statue here is a gladiator. So we're just going to kind of sketch out. Again, this is super rough. You don't have to have these be magnificent. They just have to be indicative of what you're going for. So this is a knee here with a boot, and his other foot is back here, And he has got a sword. This is all just a stone statue. Put in some little bits of shading and shadow on that front side. And he's got a little bit on his back. So that's actually a golem who protects the shop from would-be thieves. Now, in addition, there are a number of windows in here. And we make the windows by leaving them white when we colorize the walls. And that's just by making our lines heavier. Again, this is an illustration and not a playstyle map. So the goal is this should give the GM the size, the location of where everything is at, the basic layout. The GM can then decide, are they going to draw the map on a battle map if they need to, which hopefully they don't. Hopefully the NPCs, when they're visiting this magic shop, don't initiate any combat. But in case they do, you want to be able to have the sizes and shapes of things. So we're going to go through and just... So back here we're going to put, maybe this will be just a big stack of bags. And they're kind of sitting all up on each other. Lots more shadows. And that could be the feed that is available for horses, because this is also just a trade shop. So a little barrel with a cask. In this corner here, we'll put a crate. And just putting in some touches to make this be a little more lived in. So here we'll put a smaller crate. And just continuing up some of these lines as we go through and show some of that scale. And hammer in those walls. Now this building here is in a city. Oh, sorry. I hope that didn't mess up the video too much. I know now we got a little bit of wobble. Bear with me. I hope you do not get seasick. So yes, this building is in a city. So I'm not putting any windows along the sides. There are going to be no windows on the sides, just on the front. And think of these like big storefront windows. So these windows are important because there are glass golems in. And then we'll give it a little bit of a front porch feel. And sorry, trying to keep that on camera so it shows, but just some slat, almost like an old west with the sidewalk. And give it a little bit of character and shading, of course. I want good shading. some of the wood grain called out in here. We'll have a knot in there. And well, we're actually going slower than I thought. I apologize. I was hoping to have a little bit more, a little further on this map. You can tell that part of me is challenged in trying to do a lot of detail. I love detail. The more detail we can give to our players, the more details that they tend to be able to sop up and enjoy. So this back here is the back counter. There are some hooks on this side that hold some gear. Up here we've got a number of hooded lanterns. Just trying to think of equipment that would be available. Because while the patrons of this shop look to buy and sell, this is also a box with some candles in it for the lanterns, some flasks of oil, stacked up nice and neat. And they sell adventuring gear as well. A little bit of cracking in some of those tiles. And then these racks, this here is the counter, so we're going to put a box here. This is a banded box, and then a ledger with a quill, and then maybe something that got returned. Someone didn't want it. Hard to say what it is. We'll have to investigate. Roll me an investigation check. Or a perception if you're just kind of side-eyeing while you're looking at the wares. And on this one here, this is where they're going to have weapons. So maybe we'll do a fancy dagger. And a leaf gladius. Ooh, that's a rough one. And maybe, I don't know what this is here. We'll have to investigate that as well. Let's see, on this one here, this is a stand with weapons. And this has got spears in it. And you can just go through and pop in different things on the shelves. Canteens. Bag of rations. This is a everlasting jug that's in disguise. I think that's in their inventory. Maybe not. And then this one is an iron box. A little bit more shading there. But what we want to do is just populate this as an illustration. And still a few more minutes. Okay. So this one here we're going to label as main floor. And just to follow suit with these stairs, we want to give them some shadow. Of course, these go down. So a little bit of shadow, a little bit less, even less, and then even with the rest. So that goes down into the bottom. And just like that, we've got a first map. What a magic shop. What a supply shop. I've still got 2 shelves open. I'm curious on what we should put on there. I'm going to wait to do that and see if we get any comments coming in on what we can put in there. But when you're doing something like this, it goes back to that familiarity with the location. By being familiar with that location, we're going to have, for our players, a good understanding of what they're going to encounter. And more importantly, once they have that encounter and meet those NPCs and shop the wares, we can react to how they react to the environment that we present to them with confidence, with knowledge, and above all, without looking like we're confused or having to reach for things or put things in that just don't make sense. Mapping is a super important part of your game world. Anytime you get to interact with aspects of your game world is going to be a super important aspect to, again, have that confidence of what your game world is. And when you present that to your players with that level of confidence, it's just going to make a amazing amount of difference. If you're already doing this, kudos to you. I definitely would love to hear some of your feedback. I'd love to hear some of your examples, some of the things that you do to prep, to reuse, to present. If it's something you're not doing, I strongly encourage it. I know it's prep work. I know it takes a lot of time, but the best games that we present are the games that we best are prepared to present with confidence, knowledge, and understanding. So, as we sign off for our first show of our new schedule with The Journey on Monday nights, make sure you share this out. And make sure you give us a follow so we can help grow the community and reach new audience members. Don't hesitate to shoot us information, let us know content that you like to see us cover, and where you would have the best feedback or gain the most knowledge and information from this show. So if you were able to catch us tonight, thank you. If you're catching us on a video on demand, I hope you enjoy. Make sure you get down the schedule. Every Monday night, we're going to be looking at the journeys and where your adventures will take you. And before we sign off, I just want to pop in a quick comment here. We'll just say, where will your adventures take you? Because that is our tagline. So from all of us at Green Oaks Gaming, I hope you have a fantastic week ahead of you. Be sure to check out our full schedule. We've got a lot of content coming every week. So until the next show, Have a fantastic evening. Have a great night. And we'll see you on the next one.